So, bom dia. Today, we will do something that I should have done maybe on Friday. Instead of covering all 4 chapters on gender, race and ethnicity, social class, age and ability separately, I thought I would try to pull them all together and emphasize the framework that I use to think about each of these factors and their relationship to sport. But today, and so we'll do that for a few minutes, and then we will focus primarily on disability issues today, because disability issues have been ignored in the sociology of sport. In my past editions of the book, I have some friends or colleagues who are experts on disability, and they keep telling me, you need a chapter on disability. And I said, when there's more research, then I can pull it together. And then Elizabeth Pike and me, Elizabeth is a colleague in England, we said that we could do a chapter on age and ability and tie them together and then use the literature from both of those topics and have a good, strong chapter. And that's what we did. And I'm pretty happy with that chapter. You know, when you do something for the first time, you always want to change things. But and this is the first time that I've really talked about the chapter that I've written. So this is a new experience for me. But let's, first of all, I want to go back and create for you a picture of the organization of all 4 of those chapters, and then that will help all of us, including me, understand more about age and ability. So each of those chapters, gender, race and ethnicity, social class, age and ability, each of them start with a discussion of ideology, the ideas and beliefs that are related to those factors in society. Now, obviously, the ideas and beliefs in Brazil are different when it comes to each one of those things than they are in the United States or any other country. Every culture creates their own ideas and beliefs about gender, race and ethnicity, social class and age and ability. So, but there is, in every society, there is an ideology, a shared set of beliefs about these factors. And because ideology is widely shared, and because it usually privileges one category of people over other categories of people, it's difficult to change ideology. In other words, ideology resists change because it is connected, it is a cultural factor that is connected with structures. And it's very difficult to change it because you have to change not only the way that people think, but also the way the social world is organized. And in many cases, ideologies are supported and reaffirmed by religious beliefs. And that makes ideology very difficult to change because people don't like to change religious beliefs. In many cases, they feel that those beliefs are grounded in the Word of God, and you cannot change the Word of God. So that's another reason why ideologies resist change. So when the first feminists around the world started to challenge gender ideology, people used religion as a way to say that they were immoral, they were unnatural, they were evil, and so they used religion as a way to maintain the current ideology. But there is hope, because it is possible to change any idea, any ideology, but usually that change is very slow and uneven. You know, it happens for a few years and then maybe it slows down. And there's always pushback. So we call it in English backlash. So when you try to move forward, people are going to make an effort to push back. And so in the United States, for example, in sport, we had much progress between 1978 and the year 2000 when it comes to women in sport. Many new opportunities, many positive changes, but then in the year 2000, there has been pushback. And if you look at the data show that from 2000 to 2015, there have been very few changes. And we thought once the changes started, they would continue automatically, but that's not true. You know, if you want changes to occur, you never stop working. And because there will always be some segment that wants to push back, return to the good old days, to the days when men had power, white people had power, upper class people had power, and middle-aged people had power. So, so ideology is related to power, and it's also connected with issues of fairness and equity. So the people whose interests are served by ideology, the people who benefit from ideology, do all that they can to preserve it and preserve their privileged status. So, and we see that, I think in gender, it's so very clear that men have constantly resisted changes that would force them to share their resources with women. So in sports. And I remember when we had a law, you know, when the law in the United States was passed back in 1971 that said, because sport in schools is defined as an educational activity, women need the same opportunities for education as men do. And that law passed because it was an education law. People didn't think about sport when that law was passed, but after the law was passed, people said, wait, women and some men said, wait, sport is educational? That means that half of the opportunities have to go to women. And the men said, well, that can't happen because we have 90% of all opportunities and we spend 99% of all the money goes to men. And they said, this is not fair to men because now we have to give some of our money, because they define that as normal, we have to give some of our money to women. And so they resisted. And I remember at my university, I was on the committee that was dealing with this issue. And I said to the men who were the coaches and the athletic director, I said, this is a very simple operation. You take all of your resources, you divide by 2, and then you figure out how much women get. And they just could not divide by 2. This is a basic mathematical operation. And they all had college degrees, but they had a problem dividing by 2. So the people, usually, people who have power have other tools to use to resist change. They can use the media, they can use curriculum, they can use laws, and religion to reproduce and reaffirm the traditional ideology. And that is, these are words we use in sociology. They try to maintain hegemony. And that's a concept that was developed by Antonio Gramsci. And basically it means a process through which people with power are able to develop agreement or consent among the people over whom they exercise power. And so people with power are always trying to generate consent so that they can maintain their hegemony. But there are oppositional forces that exist in society, people who want to resist that hegemony, and we call that counter-hegemonic forces. So there's always a tension in society around structures and ideas that privilege some people over others. So the counter-hegemonic or the oppositional forces or groups or alliances, they may have to sometimes go underground and hide because people with power have been able to use their resources to define them as being a threat to the society, to the country, to patriotic feelings, to all of those things. So, they're defined in some cases as criminals. So, so when they lack power, when the counter-hegemonic forces lack power, they sometimes have to go underground, okay? Because the agents of social control, police, military, and others define them as deviant and immoral, disruptive, and so on. So the goal of people who challenge a dominant ideology is to obtain equal rights, just equal rights and opportunities in the society. So in other words, they are seeking fairness. And, but that is defined as a radical thing. So very quickly, I just want to talk about the inequalities that exist in each of the areas that those, the first three chapters, gender, race and ethnicity, and social class, focus on. So in the Olympics, you know this, the Olympics are organized, were organized originally by and for men. Women were not allowed. And so the events for men have always outnumbered the events for women. And that was true in 2012. And I don't know yet about 2016. I suspect that it will be true in 2016. But women are gaining slowly. They're not you know, the IOC made goals, set goals back 20 years ago, 25 years ago. They said by now, by 2020, there would be equity. And there would be at least, I forget, at least 20% or 30% of women in power positions in the international governing bodies and in the IOC. So the percentage of female athletes has always been lower. So it's about 40%, 41% in the last Olympics, and 60% of the participants are men. And in the National Olympic Committees and the international sport federations, we see that women are underrepresented significantly. And the women in executive boards, in many cases, these women are on special committees related to gender. I mean, they're not related to the general decisions about how the organization will operate. So women are underrepresented in all decision-making positions in sports worldwide, and the progress for change has been very, very slow because nobody wants to give up power. And men don't want to give up power. If women had all the power, maybe they would be the same and resist giving up power. But political theorists have made that argument for a long time. When you possess power, you're very unlikely to give it up. So one of the big inequities is in Paralympic sports. And you will see this when you watch the Paralympics. Are they going to be televised in Brazil? Have they been televised in the past?
Yeah.
Very little. Yeah, the United States, we had almost no coverage of the Paralympics. Only highlights at 10 o'clock at night on a small cable channel.
Huge.
Yeah.
Only the page.
Yeah. So the main networks did not cover it at all. NBC paid, I forget how many hundreds of millions of dollars to cover the Olympics and the Olympics and Paralympics, and they decided not to cover any of the Paralympics. So, and also that's one issue. The other issue is that the Paralympics are dominated by men. I mean, many more men participants than women participants. And that's related to a number of factors that we'll talk about a little bit later. But one of the big factors is war, where men get injured. Men who are good athletes, good physical condition, get injured, and they want to stay active, and they then become some of the Paralympic athletes. Men also do risky things and have accidents that leads to a disability of some kind, an impairment of some kind, and that occurs more frequently for men than for women. So here is a diagram that I like when I give presentations to women coaches. You know, the women coaches want to know, where are we? Are we making real progress in terms of gaining equity and fairness? And I say that back in the 1960s, women were excluded almost completely, not completely, but almost completely. And then the door was opened a little bit, and women started coming in the door of sport. And but when they come in, there are two challenges for women. One of them is to change the culture that has been created by and for men. You know, if you are the only woman in a group that's always been men, then you know that it's difficult work to remain a part of that group, because you have to learn how the men do things, how the men think, and then you have to figure out whether you're going to try to do it just like the men, or you're going to try to do it maybe the way you would like to do it, but explain to the men that this is what's why you're doing this, and it's difficult work. We can talk about that outside of sport as well. If you enter an occupation that's all men, and as a woman, then you are not only going to have the challenge of your work, you're going to have the challenge of working in a group of men and in a culture that is not related directly to your values and experiences. So my wife, when she took a job, she sold wine for many years. And when she went into the wine and liquor industry, it was all men. She was the only woman. And when she would come home at night, she would be exhausted, because she not only was working hard to try to sell wine, but she was also working hard to try to survive among a group of men who would say, come on out, smoke a cigar, have a shot, let's get together. And they were testing her to see if she could be one of the boys, one of the guys, and if they could break her down. It was they weren't hostile, but they were using their culture to see if she was going to resist, if she was going to try to challenge them, and it was difficult for her. She used humor all the time. I'll give you one little example. She said to her boss one time, you know, I'm having a difficult time getting my product on the shelf at eye level, you know. And he said, have you tried to unbutton your blouse? One button. And she said back to him, oh, do you use your zipper that way? And it shocked him, but he realized what was happening. So, and she was very good at that. So if you're a woman coach and you enter a program that's been controlled by men, it's the same thing. You know, it's very hard work to survive that. So in the United States, and I think probably in Brazil too, this is where the progress is. We're starting to revise some of the culture in some cases. And you also, in order to gain full inclusion, you also have to enter positions of power, so you can make some decisions. So I guess one of the examples I use is if all of us in here are having a party, okay, and the door is shut, and there's many people out there that want to get into this party, because this party in here is the #1 party in all of the university. So, so we have made plans. We plan the party. We plan what music. We plan what food. We plan what kinds of activities we're going to do. And then we say, oh, maybe we should open the door a little bit. So we open the door a little bit, and a few people come in, and we say, aren't we wonderful? We're including these people. But when these people come in, they don't feel welcome because they have not been a part of the planning. You know, these are our activities, these are our priorities, these are the things that we prefer to do, and they are coming from a different perspective because they have never had a chance to be around us. So they've developed their own values and experiences. So when we let them in, what we're assuming is that they are going to accept everything that we think and do. But that's not inclusion, okay? That's just opening up the door a little bit, okay? So inclusion occurs only when those people we let in, next party, they are part of the planning committee. And they have an opportunity to say, maybe we should do some other things that are different than you've done in the past. And that's when negotiation occurs, and it's a very strenuous process for the women, for the blacks in some cases, for lower income people, working class people, when they enter new situations, okay? And try to exercise power. But full inclusion does not occur until you revise the culture and gain positions of power. So we talked about gender already, but race is a special concept. We don't have time to talk all about it as history, but generally speaking, in most societies that we're familiar with, people do make distinctions on the basis of skin color. And we know that skin color goes from Snow White all the way to midnight black. So, and there's every shade in between. So the big question is, where do we draw the line to separate white from black, for example? Well, that's a political and social decision, all right? That's not a biological decision, okay? So, because there are many mixtures, and so we have to make a decision, because race is a continuous trait. Not race, skin color is a continuous trait, just like height, all right? So who is short? You know, and who is tall? Well, it depends, right? Maybe we should say anybody over 6 feet is tall. But that's not a biological decision. You know, that's a social decision, all right? And maybe if you're under 5 feet, then you're short. But maybe in the Netherlands, it would be 5 feet 5. So all of those are related to culture and the social decisions that occur within a particular culture. What's tall, what's short, what's black, what's white. So because skin color is a continuous characteristic, the definitions of black and white are different in Brazil than they are in the United States. Different in the Caribbean than they are in the United States. So, you know, you can go to some islands in the Caribbean, and I would walk around and I would say, where are the white people here? And someone from that island might say, they're everywhere, because we have 80% white and, you know, only 20% black. And to me, because I've been raised in U.S. culture and learned a particular way to define race, I would not see it that way. So those definitions differ. So racial category lines are drawn on the basis of continuous traits, and they can be drawn anywhere. All right. So you know, when the explorers, the colonizers from England were taking over 2/3 of the world, and they went to other parts of the world, at first they said, there's black people and there's us. So the first theories were just talking about black and white and yellow. I mean, but then they discovered when they went to the Pacific Islands and to South America and to other places that they found that there were many people that were tan and brown and all the different shades in between. So then they started developing theories where there were 6 races and 11 sub-races and 22 sub-collateral races. And so then you had so many divisions, you had 50 different lines on that continuum, dividing people into different racial categories. And it became so cumbersome that it became a useless concept in any kind of categorical way. So anyway, some people draw many lines, other people draw few. In the United States, 1 line. Because we had a special kind of slavery in the United States, very different than Brazil. In Brazil, black people could earn their freedom. In the United States, that was impossible. And in the United States, they made rules that black people could never own property, and that black people were defined as property. So if a black man had a baby with a white woman, or a white man had a baby with a black woman, that baby would be considered 100% black because they didn't want people with dark skin owning property and gaining power within the United States. So anybody, if you had one little bit of black heritage, you were defined as 100% black according to the law, so that you would never own property. And that legacy still affects us today. So, and in sport, it's very interesting. In sport, in baseball, the early baseball teams allowed baseball players from Cuba and from Venezuela and from some other Latin American countries, but mostly Cuba and Venezuela. And some of those Latinos had very dark skin, but because they were defined as Spanish, they weren't counted as black. So there were some African Americans who were very clever. They learned Spanish, They created a biography that said, I'm from Cuba, and they spoke Spanish. And so then they were able to sneak into Major League Baseball and play, and people didn't define, because people didn't define them as African Americans. So, the history is that no African Americans played in the mainstream white sports in the United States until around 1950. And then there were the first people, but change after that was very slow. And today, still, very few black coaches in certain sports, only one or two black owners, team owners in all of major professional sports in the United States. Very few black athletic directors in universities. Black football coaches in 121 big universities, where 60% of all the players are black. Less than 5% of the coaches are black. So, and the reason for that is the athletic directors say coaches need to be able to interact with our alumni at the university. These universities are white, have been white for all of their histories. So they feel that black coaches might not be able to interact with the white alumni and raise money for the program. So they define the black applicants for the jobs as less qualified than the white applicants. But that occurs. It occurs in Brazil too, I'm sure. I don't know all the specifics. But do you have a proportionate number of black coaches in the top level of your professional football, soccer? The same proportion as the number of black players? Yeah, probably not. So there needs to be a change in the culture of that administrative organization. Needs to be a change in the structure. So those two. All right. So. You know, when African Americans first became involved in sport in the United States, back in boxing in the 1920s, actually before the 1920s, when a black boxer named Jack Johnson was very good, whites didn't know how to explain that because, you know, in the past they thought whites were the best boxers because they had good strategy, they were very smart, they were strong. So when a black boxer beat a white boxer, they had to come up with some kind of an explanation that was consistent with their racism. So they said that black boxers had smaller brains and thicker skulls so that they could be hit. You could hit a black all day and the black wouldn't care. The black person wouldn't care. So, but that was consistent with their racial ideology. Right? And then when African Americans made their way into basketball, baseball, football, American football, people said, well, it's because blacks are not as evolved as whites. You know, whites are more evolved. They're superior in terms of evolution. Blacks are inferior in terms of evolution. They're closer to animals, to monkeys, and they have physical characteristics that are more animal-like. And that's why they are successful in sport. But, you know, the other issue is, if you wanted to be in sport, one of those first African Americans, you had to be very, 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 very good. They wouldn't sign a mediocre African American. It was someone who was going to contribute, be the best player on the team. So whites had to come up with an explanation that was consistent with their racism. So, and have you heard about the Harlem Globetrotters? Yeah, they maybe played in Brazil. the Harlem Globetrotters are a legacy of segregation and racism because in the 1950s, blacks still were not playing in the National Basketball League Association. They didn't have opportunities. So if you wanted to play basketball as a black man, then they formed, actually it was a white Jewish man who formed the Harlem Globetrotters. And the Harlem Globetrotters would play before the NBA games. But in order to please the spectators, all of whom were white and racist, including my family, when my father took me to a Harlem Globetrotters game in Chicago, the Harlem Globetrotters came out and they sang Sweet Georgia Brown and they whistled. It was just like the old plantation. And they played like children. You know, they did tricks with the ball. When the referee had his back turned, they tiptoe around and do deviant things. You know, they tried to act in a way that was consistent with the white people's racism so that white people would accept that. And white people did, they loved it. They loved to have their racism reaffirmed. So more people would go see the Harlem Globetrotters than go to the NBA games because it was wonderful. They could reaffirm their racism and see basketball skills. So now the Harlem Globetrotters have changed since then. Okay. So,
No question, like to play legally, who is considered black in the United States? Like you have to have a grade or what generation? You said like if you had some black blood, you would be black. But today, what's the law?
That law, the one drop rule law has changed. Okay, and today it's very difficult to classify people in terms of black and white because there has been more intermarriage. There's much more racial mixing, and not just black and white, but black and Latino, white and Latino, and other skin colors as well. So now you can see someone, and it may be difficult to make the classification. However, racists are very clever, and in the United States, those classifications are still made, but they're made not according to law, but according to social decisions. So the segregation that exists in the United States today between black and white is as strong in 2015 as it was when I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s. 80% of African Americans in the United States go to schools where over 80% of the students are African American. And most white students go to schools where 95% of the students are white. So we still have housing segregation, school segregation. In occupations, there's still segregation, but it differs from one occupation to another. So we still have major racial problems in the United States related to segregation, even though we have Barack Obama as president. In fact, Barack Obama created backlash because when he was elected president, all of the people whose racism was dormant, was kept under control, they said, oh my goodness, black people are taking over the United States. This is the time when we have to stand firm and make sure that there is no more black people gaining positions of power. They were frightened, very frightened. The Tea Party was formed. It's a quasi-political party, mostly from the southern United States. And they are absolutely fearful that our country will be taken over by black people. And that black people will get their revenge by discriminating against whites, by making rules that privilege blacks and disadvantage whites. So when Barack Obama was elected, we said, this is great progress. But what we didn't know was that it would bring out the backlash, the resistance, the opposition to ideological changes, to structural changes. So it will be a long time before we elect another black president.
Do you think that this relation is similar like Hillary if she's elected to women and men?
Yeah, gender has a slightly different dynamic than race, but well, you tell me. You've elected a woman as president. So Dilma Rousseff is president. So after Dilma Rousseff retires, will people say it's okay to have another woman president, or will they say we elected Dilma Rousseff and that didn't work out so well, so we better stick with the traditional way of looking at who are good leaders, who can make good decisions, who can make decisions without becoming emotional, without worrying about nurturing people. They will start to use old ideological explanations as possible reasons not to elect another woman. Maybe. I don't know about this yet, but I think if we elect Hillary Clinton, and this is the problem, the Bushes, the Clintons, it's like we have monarchies, but so I have a problem with it. But if we elect Hillary Clinton, if she's very successful, very, very, very successful, then maybe people will say, we should have had, another woman candidate, no problem. But if she's not successful, and there's resistance, then many people will say, see, I told you, women shouldn't be president, we shouldn't have another woman president. So that's the resistance that we talked about. Right? It's always going to be there. So unless these first people are the very best, people will find reasons to say we shouldn't have allowed this to happen. So, now other questions about race or ethnicity or gender. These are complicated topics, but my point is that there are cultural barriers to change and structural barriers to change. And we need to constantly revise, come up with new strategies. If we're interested in change, we have to constantly come up with new strategies. Because every change brings a new challenge. All right? So when blacks became baseball players in the major leagues, coaches, major problem for coaches. Because when they traveled, blacks couldn't stay in the same hotels. They couldn't eat in the same restaurants. So how are you going to run a team when 2 or 3 of your players can't eat in the same restaurant as your white players? And what if your white players, many of whom came from the South in baseball, what if they were racist? That's a problem. And then what if the players on the other team are racist? And when Jackie Robinson, the first baseball player, when he was playing second base, and he would cover the base and there would be a runner coming in, those runners, they had metal spikes on their shoes. They would sharpen their spikes. And when they would come in and slide, they would take those sharp spikes and try to rip open his legs so that he wouldn't be able to play. And when he was at bat, the catcher would be saying all sorts of racial things, calling him nigger, this, nigger, that, talking about his mother, his family, his sister, all of those things, and he had to concentrate on the next pitch. And when he walked out, the spit coming down from the bleachers was like rain from the white spectators. So, what kind of internal strength did he need in order to survive? Unbelievable internal strength to survive under those circumstances. So when you make change, then it creates new challenges. How are you going to organize your team relationships now that it's racially desegregated? And now we have new ethnic challenges. We have multinational basketball teams, baseball teams, tennis teams, and the coaches now, the San Antonio Spurs and the NBA, players from 8 different countries on the team. And the coach is a sociological magician. He not only can interact with each of these players individually, he has been able to take players from 8 different cultures and bring them together and make them one of the most successful teams in the world. He also hired the first woman coach. So, he's a very progressive man, and you need to make change. If blacks want change, they need help from progressive whites. If women want change, they need to form alliances with men. If people from working class backgrounds want to make progressive changes, they have to make alliances with people from the upper social classes. So it's difficult when you're a powerless group to change ideology and structure without making alliances with some people from the groups that have power, who are progressive people, who will work from the inside to try to bring about change. So, instead of talking about class ideology, which is very unique to the United States in the book, I don't know about Brazilian class ideology. And I'm sure it's very complicated. But, ideas about what are the characteristics of the people who have power, of people who are in poor neighborhoods. In the United States, we have an ideology that says, if you are successful, you must be good. You must be smart. You must be have good character. And if you're poor, you must have been making bad decisions. You must be lazy. You must have no motivation. You must have not taken advantage of opportunities. So there's a moral evaluation that goes along with social class categories. And that's true in many other cultures too, but I can't talk about Brazil. You can tell me about Brazil. But we will, one thing about social class that I will say is it takes resources to create sports and to maintain sports. It takes organizational resources and it takes material resources. So sports have always been controlled by people with money and power and other resources. So in many cases, sports tend to reaffirm class divisions within a society, which is kind of counterintuitive because many people think that people from low-income groups can use sport to rise up and to become successful. And we see examples of that. But those examples are few, and they don't have an impact on the majority of people. So even though there are people, young men in particular in Brazil, from poor populations who have been able to become successful in football, for example, and make millions and millions of dollars, and become celebrities, and everybody wants their autograph, everybody wants to shake their hand. That does not necessarily mean that will carry over and affect all people of color or people from low-income backgrounds. And in fact, it might do the opposite. So in the United States, we see athletes who are African-American athletes who are making millions and millions of dollars. And white people look at those athletes and they say, see, we don't need special programs to help African-Americans because that person made it. And the reason the other people don't make it is they're lazy. So they haven't taken advantage of opportunities. Because I see it's possible. We have a black president, we have black basketball players. So we don't need to make changes. So sport, in some cases, can lead to change, true. But in some cases, can actually reaffirm existing ideologies and existing structures. And so we have to try to do studies to understand when it leads to change and when it leads to reaffirmation. So, so we know that we know that I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, we know that in 2012, in the Olympics in London, the British athletes did very well. But 30% of the athletes who won medals for Great Britain went to the private schools. In other words, they came from families that had a lot of money. Only 7% of all of the students in Great Britain go to private schools. So 7% of the students go to private schools, but 30% of the medal winners had gone to private schools. So to win medals, you need money. You need resources. So there's not a level playing field in the world. You know, 40% of all countries in the Olympics have never won a medal. So the wealthy countries, I think 3 or 4 wealthy countries have won, 4 or 5 of the countries that have relatively high amounts of wealth have won 80% of all Olympic medals. So, when we look at social class globally, we see that playing sports is a luxury, all right? It's not an everyday kind of a thing. And, you know, in the United States, and these data are maybe 3 or 4 years old, in the United States, people have about $60 a day to live, every person. You know, if you take all of the income in the United States and divide it by all of the people. And in 39 less developed nations around the world, people have 58 cents a day. So over 1/3 of the world's population, it used to be close to half, lives on less than $2 a day. For example, and I haven't figured all of the math on this, but this is an estimate. In 2015, Lionel Messi made as much money as 200,000 people in less developed nations used to live for their entire year. So 1 Leon Messi, 200,000 people in less developed nations in terms of money. for the year. So sports and sport participation are a luxury for at least half of the people in the world. And this is true not only related to the Olympics, but also to the Paralympics. You know, the wealthy nations are the medal winners. 80 of the 204 participating nations in 2012 had never won an Olympic medal. 51 had won fewer than 5 medals. 51 countries had won fewer than 5 medals in all of Olympic history, 108 years. Many nations have not won a medal for 40 years. The United States, with its wealth and population, had won 2,549 medals, more than any other nation. So training for elite competition now is so expensive that about 80% of the global population has no realistic chance of ever winning a medal, unless they find a way to train in a wealthy country. And by going to a university in the United States, training in England, training in Germany, training in another country where there are the resources to develop skills. So, and this pattern is even more pronounced in the Paralympics, because the Paralympics takes more money for participation than the regular Olympics in many ways, because you need special equipment. It's difficult for transportation to occur because people have wheelchairs, they have prosthetic devices, so it's very expensive to travel. And so the wealthier nations are at an advantage. And in the Paralympics, there's an interesting advantage for the host team, because the travel expenses are lower, and it's easier to get a bigger team together. And so the host team usually wins quite a few medals in the Paralympics because they have more athletes there. That's one reason. So young people in poor and developing nations are required to work, so they don't have time to play sports. They have to work so their family can survive. And when they do play, their facilities and equipment are makeshift. They're inconsistent over time. They don't have good access to coaches, medical care, and all of the other things that people from wealthier nations take for granted. So this is a photo that I've used in the past. You know, like Nike, just do it. And just do what? If I had a seat, if I had pedals, if I had wheels, I could learn to ride and race. But he doesn't. So he won't ride, and he won't race. So social class, like gender and race and ethnicity, has an impact on who plays, under what conditions. So now I would like to get into a topic I've never given a formal teaching presentation on, age and ability, and we will focus mostly on ability-disability issues, because I know that some of you are doing research on the Paralympics and you're interested in the Paralympics. And you will have an opportunity to see, hopefully on television, Paralympics. So one of the big questions that I asked with Elizabeth when we were thinking about this chapter is, how much ability must you have to think of yourself as able-bodied? Do you have a similar term in Portuguese as able-bodied? You know, because in the United States, we say disabled and able-bodied. So there's two categories. And we forget that ability exists on a continuum, you know, and that variations in ability are normal. It's not like there's two groups, people who are able and disabled. It's all human beings have different abilities. That's normal. Okay? So how much ability must you have to say that you're not disabled, that you are able-bodied? And which abilities matter the most when you say this? Okay? So, you know, if I take off my glasses, when it comes to seeing long distances, I have a physical impairment. All right? Things are blurry in the distance. So if I had to do a sport without my glasses that required, like in a shooting, required good vision for a long distance, I would have a physical impairment, and we could say that Coakley is disabled. But we have a fix. You know, we have a technology that would enable Coakley to now become a shooter, because I can see perfectly. So when I take my glasses off, do I all of a sudden become disabled? Well, you know, that's an interesting question. And because many of us use various technologies to compensate for various impairments that we have, or deficiencies, or a lack of ability. So physical ability or cognitive ability in some cases. Now we have electronic technologies that will help us if we're a bad speller. You know, if we're dyslexic and we have a learning disability or an intellectual disability, now we have a technology that will allow us to participate in classes with everybody else. So we're no longer disabled. So determining who has a disability and who does not have a disability is a contentious issue. It's an issue that calls for social and political kinds of decisions. And how are we going to make a distinction? So, what is defined as ability? And in most societies, definitions of ability are influenced by what we call ableist ideology. And this is a complex concept. An ableist ideology is an interrelated set of ideas and beliefs that are widely used in a society to identify people as being physically or intellectually disabled, to justify treating them as inferior, and to organize social and physical spaces without taking them into account. Okay? And this ableist ideology, which people are challenging now all over the world, but this ableist ideology rejects physical and intellectual variation as being natural and normal among human beings. All right? It says you are either able or disabled. It ignores that the meanings given to particular abilities change over time and from one situation to another, depending on what the task is and what the expectations for people are. So my granddaughter, Aula, you know, who has cerebral palsy, and I told you this before, her left hand is like this, and she has a little bit of a limp in her left leg, but she can tie her shoes one hand. So if we lived in a world where tying your shoes one-handed was defined as a very important ability, Allie would be the able one, and I would be disabled, and you would be disabled, because probably you can't tie your shoes one-handed. And she can do zippers one-handed, she can button her shirt one-handed. You know, if you had to get dressed one-handed, Allie would beat you by 20 minutes. So, because she has those abilities. So Allie says, don't call me disabled, because I can do many things that you can't do. So don't call me disabled. So so the big question then is, Allie has decided she's not disabled. She has a job where she's working with children with special needs, and she's helping them. Because in her mind, they have disabilities, but not her. So who decides which physical or intellectual abilities are important when we classify people as disabled? And who makes those decisions? Now, you know, if you work with the Paralympics in Brazil or in other countries, or if you work with people with disabilities, you know that people have gotten together and they have tried to come up with criteria that about functional limitations. In other words, what kinds of abilities do people need to do everyday things, all right? And if you have some kind of impairment that interferes with you doing everyday things, there are experts who would say, okay, you have a disability, you are disabled, because you have major functional limitations. But some of those functional limitations may be related as much to the environment and to the attitudes and orientations of other people as to you and your ability. Because maybe you would not have functional limitations if we changed the environment. Maybe you would not have functional limitations if we helped and assisted each other in new and different ways, so that we were more inclusive. So even functional limitations has a social component to it, all right? Now, I have to be very careful when I say this, because there are many kinds of impairments that are very serious, that create serious inconveniences for people, and prevent them from doing many things that they would like to do. So, you know, functional, impairments are real. You know, Allie cannot pick up things with her left hand. That is real. That's not a social definition. That's a real impairment. But if Allie and I are setting the table for dinner, you know, I will do the things that take two hands. Allie can do the things that takes one hand. And then Allie's, then her impairment becomes less relevant. Okay? It becomes irrelevant in that situation. So in some cases, if we were changing the world and changing the way people interact, we could lower the number of people with disabilities. So now, when we make decisions about who has a disability, what does that mean when we disable a person? And I use that term, dis, because in the United States, African Americans have a word. If you don't respect me, then you diss me. If you don't treat me with respect, then they say, you dissed me. You disrespected me. So I use that DIS very purposely for students in the United States, because when we say you have a disability, we're actually dissing people, all right? We, in a way, are treating them differently. And for many of the people with disability, they would say, you're not giving me the same kind of respect as you would give other people. You're dissing. Now let me give you an example. For 10 years, in the early 1969 through 1979, I worked with the Special Olympics. And the Special Olympics are for people with intellectual impairments. And people with Down syndrome, people who we used to call retarded in the United States. That's no longer, retarded is a very negative word in the United States. Handicapped is a very negative word. So we would say now, you have an intellectual disability. So, but back in the 1970s, people used the word retarded because your cognitive ability was not developed. It was retarded. It was slow. So when I was working with the Special Olympics, my children in the later 1970s were like 11 and 10 years old. And we went to a the National Special Olympics. And Dennis and Danielle were helping me. And we went into this area where a lot of the athletes were, and other people, and a lot of the volunteers were. And I told Dennis and Danielle that I had to do something over here. So they went over in this one room. Well, many of the volunteers were college students who were going to help. You know, every athlete in the Special Olympics has a buddy, you know, a person who helps, who goes with them. So they don't get lost, and they get to their meals on time, and so on. And Dennis and Danielle were there, and the college students came in, and they saw Dennis and Danielle, and they thought Dennis and Danielle were retired. Cute, but retired. So they went over, and they started talking to them like they would to someone with an intellectual disability. You know, what is your name? You know, what is your sport? And after that happened, Dennis and Danielle came back to me and they said, they thought we were retarded. And I said, how did that make you feel? And they said, it made me feel like a little baby. Like I couldn't do anything. And I said, that's a good learning experience. Because people treat people in the Special Olympics in a patronizing way, in a paternalistic way. And Dennis and Danielle saw that from their own experience right away. And that helped them in the future. They never would deal with someone with an intellectual disability in a patronizing way because they know how that made them feel. It made them feel like they were an infant, like they were a little child. But that's the way many people with intellectual disabilities are treated, not just in the United States, but in many countries around the world. So they felt dissed. They were disrespected as a person. They were not given the same respect that they were accustomed to receiving. So to decide about disability is a political question, and this question is answered politically in connection with official policies, and they are answered socially in relationships. And in fact, I don't know if you have this word in Portuguese, but in the past, in the United States, if someone was acting in a foolish way, in a silly way, or a dumb way, people would say, you're a retard.
My sister said it.
Do you have that term? And, you know, that for someone with an intellectual disability, you know, that's terrible. You know, you're saying you are not normal. You are not like me. You're a retard. Because I live in the empire of the normal. And you don't belong in my empire. You have to live on the edges, on the margins. You're in exile. So that's why I use DIS. It's a form of disrespect. And we have to learn in our relationships to not diss people, to treat people with respect so that their potential can be actualized and that they can feel respected. Now, here's another question. If each of these women in the 400 meters in the Paralympics in London, if each of those women can run 400 meters faster than 95% of all of the men in the world, on what basis do we say that they're disabled? On what basis? They can run faster than not just 95% of the men, but 95% of the people in the world. So they are more able than 95% of all the people in the world when it comes to running 400 meters. But we call them disabled. And the big question is, do they see themselves as disabled? And in the interviews that I saw with the athletes from the Paralympics in 2012, not one of those athletes said that they were disabled. You know, I have challenges. I overcome those challenges, but I'm not disabled. I can move around. I can do this. I can do that. There's some things that are a problem, but some things are a problem for you and you. So I'm not disabled. And that's one of the interesting things about the Paralympics. And I don't know about Brazil. These were all English language speakers, but the people I know in Colorado Springs who are participants, who are Paralympic athletes, they don't see themselves as disabled. So they see themselves as having different physical characteristics. They see themselves, in some cases, as having an impairment, but they don't see themselves as disabled. And that's an interesting thing, because many people, when they watch the Paralympics, they say, isn't this wonderful? It's going to change everyone's ideas about people with disabilities. Well, not necessarily true, because the athletes don't see themselves as disabled. And if you are in a wheelchair with a serious physical impairment, and you are watching the Paralympics, you don't have any inspiration, because you are watching people in a $6,000 wheelchair racing, and your wheelchair costs $100 at the local used equipment store. And it's very difficult to roll your wheelchair on carpet, much less up a hill. So you are watching people with all of this sophisticated equipment who can do all of these amazing things with their equipment, and everybody says, oh, that will inspire people with disabilities. Well, people with disabilities have a difficult time, in many cases, identifying with Paralympic athletes, because those athletes have access to equipment that's different than theirs. They have opportunities that are different than they have. You know, they don't have a wheelchair that they can use to play basketball. They don't have transportation to get to a gymnasium. And if they did have transportation, there's steps going to the gymnasium. They can't get in. If they get in, the doors are too narrow for them to get through with their wheelchairs. If the doors are okay, then they try to go to the toilet, and the stalls are too narrow to get in. There's not enough room to turn their wheelchairs. So there are so many obstacles that are built into the environment. They say, well, this is all fine to race in a wheelchair, but that doesn't have any implications for me. You know, that doesn't change my life. It doesn't lead people to pass new rules about accessibility and changing the way buildings are designed and renovated. It doesn't influence architects on how they design houses, how they design entrances into houses. It doesn't change any of those things. So the Paralympics does not change my life. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it fits with the way many people with disabilities think about the Paralympics. You know, if you define yourself as able-bodied, you see the Paralympics and you say, oh wow, these people are amazing, this is inspirational, but people with disabilities are not thinking the same way you are when they watch. Now, some of you I know are working and doing research on this, so if you have comments related to that, or maybe some of the things I'm saying are not applicable to Brazil, Rafael, any issues?
Let me try to explain this. For us, able, okay, ability for us translate from Portuguese, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But this word specifically, disabled,
Disabled?
yeah, for us it's not impossible to translate, but it's hard to translate. We don't use this word in Portuguese.
Okay.
We use another word for disability person.
Okay. And can you give me some kind of translation?
Yeah, we use deficiência.
Oh, okay.
Pessoa com deficiência, people with disability or no disability, is something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you would say people with a deficiency?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Or don't deficiency.
Isso, mas assim, no esporte, de uma forma geral, a gente percebe hoje a pessoa com deficiência a partir das suas habilidades.
In the sports, we study and talk about specific Paralympic sports with the abilities.
Mm-hmm.
We start to talk about and we start to train thinking in these abilities, don't disabilities.
Exactly.
Yes. We try to do something like this.
And that's where the Paralympics can be of big value, because what it does, if you think of people in terms of abilities rather than deficiencies, then you can start to challenge the ableist ideology. And if we could get everyone to think in terms of what someone's potential is, what their abilities are, and not think in terms of deficiencies or disabilities, then we can undermine and change the ableist ideology. Yeah. And so that's a step in the right direction. But we also then have, let me get to, okay, maybe we should take, I'm getting tired, maybe we should take a 15-minute break and come back, and then we'll finish talking about it. Thank you. Pô, vem.